The Middle Ages are often remembered for their castles, knights, and chivalry. But there was a far darker side, lurking beneath the surface of courtly romances and grand feasts. This was a time when justice was brutal, confessions were forced, and punishment was public spectacle. In an age when belief in divine judgment mixed freely with fear, superstition, and cruelty, torture became both a tool of authority and a warning to others. Many of the medieval torture devices that actually existed were not only real, but chillingly creative, designed to inflict maximum pain while breaking both body and spirit. Step inside the cold stone walls of a medieval dungeon, and the atmosphere changes instantly. The air is damp and heavy. Chains clink softly from dark corners. Here justice was not measured by fairness or evidence, but by how much pain a person could withstand before they broke. Torture was not always used to punish the guilty. It was often the means to an end, a way to extract confessions or force information out of the accused, regardless of whether that information was true. In many cases, it was guilt by suspicion, and the outcome was already written before the first scream echoed off the walls. One of the most infamous torture devices of the era was the rack. This was a large wooden frame with rollers at both ends. The accused would be tied at the wrists and ankles, and then slowly stretched as the rollers were turned. Muscles tore. Eventually, limbs could be dislocated entirely. It was not a quick punishment. The victim was kept alive and conscious as their body was pulled apart inch by agonizing inch. The rack was often used to make prisoners name accomplices or confess to crimes they may not have committed at all. Its cruelty lay not just in the pain, but in the psychological terror of watching your own body betray you. Another terrifying device was the Iron Maiden, though its existence during the Middle Ages is debated. Popular imagination and later museum exhibitions cemented it in medieval lore. This was a tall, coffin-like structure lined with sharp metal spikes. The victim would be placed inside, and the doors shut slowly, driving the spikes into their flesh. It was designed to pierce but not immediately kill, so the victim remained upright, bleeding and dying slowly. While some historians argue the Iron Maiden is more of a later myth, its symbolic role as an icon of medieval brutality is deeply entrenched. Real or not, there were plenty of documented devices that left no doubt about the creative horror of medieval torture. The breaking wheel, also known as the Catherine wheel, was used for executions in the most gruesome fashion. A person would be tied to a large wooden wheel, and then their limbs would be smashed with iron bars. Sometimes the broken body was then woven through the spokes of the wheel and left on public display as a grim warning to others. Death could take hours or even days, especially if the victim was positioned in a way that avoided vital organs. It was both punishment and public theater, a stark reminder of the price of defiance. Another instrument of agony was the thumbscrew. As simple as it sounds, it was brutally effective. The prisoner's fingers or thumbs were placed between metal bars or inside a vise, which was then tightened gradually. Bones cracked, skin tore, nerves were crushed. It was a method meant to extract confessions quickly and could be used repeatedly. The pain was intense and localized, causing long-term damage even if the victim survived. The pair of anguish was a particularly bizarre and grotesque device. It was a metal instrument shaped like a flower bud that could be inserted into the mouth, rectum, or vagina, depending on the accusation. Once inside, it was expanded using a screw mechanism, tearing internal tissue in the most excruciating way. This was often used on those accused of heresy, blasphemy, or adultery. Its cruelty was both physical and symbolic, meant to violate and shame as well as destroy. Then there was the infamous strapado. This device involved tying a person's hands behind their back and hoisting them into the air by a rope attached to the wrists. Once suspended, they were suddenly dropped, yanking their shoulders out of their sockets. The process could be repeated, leaving lasting damage to joints and nerves. The strapado was often used in religious inquisitions, where the goal was to force accused heretics to renounce their beliefs and conform. The pain was sharp and shocking, and many confessions were extracted before the second drop ever came. Perhaps the most nightmarish aspect of medieval torture was the public nature of it all. Torture and execution were not hidden behind closed doors. They were spectacles. Crowds gathered in city squares to watch hangings, burnings, and beheadings. Devices like the pillory and the stocks were used to humiliate offenders in public. The pillory clamped the head and hands in place so that villagers could mock, spit, or throw rotten food. The stocks immobilized the legs, exposing the person to the same public scorn. Though not as physically damaging as other methods, the psychological humiliation was often unbearable. Water torture also made its appearance in various forms. One common method was dunking. The accused would be tied to a wooden chair or a seesaw-like device and dunked repeatedly in cold water, often a river or well. It was a test of survival and breath, done until the victim either passed out or confessed. Another method involved forcing large amounts of water down a person's throat, filling the stomach and lungs to the point of suffocation. Both were used to simulate drowning, triggering sheer panic. Flaying was another horror, though usually reserved for the most hated criminals or political enemies. The skin was removed from the body, often while the victim was still alive. This was a deliberate act of public vengeance, meant to strip not only the flesh, but the identity and dignity of the accused. Sometimes, the flayed skin was displayed afterward, pinned to a wall as a grotesque warning. In some cases, torture was tied closely to religious belief. The Inquisitions of the Catholic Church sought to root out heresy, and confessions were often extracted through pain. Accused heretics were tortured under the belief that pain could purify the soul. This twisted mix of spiritual and physical coercion gave rise to some of the worst abuses in medieval history. The accused, often uneducated or isolated, were no match for the power of their interrogators. They could be tortured into admitting to anything, from consorting with the devil to practicing forbidden magic. The cruelty of these methods leaves a lasting impression. But it is important to remember that they were born from a specific time and mindset. The medieval world was shaped by fear, faith, war, and power. There was a belief that pain revealed truth, that suffering had divine purpose, and that authority must be maintained through strength. Torture was not just a tool of justice. It was a symbol of control. Yet even in such a brutal era, there were voices of opposition. Some medieval thinkers and clerics condemned torture as cruel and unreliable. They argued that pain did not reveal truth but fear. Others saw it as a tool of tyranny rather than law. Over time, these ideas would grow stronger, eventually leading to reforms and the slow decline of torture as a legal practice. But during its peak, it was a reality many could not escape. Medieval torture devices were not simply instruments of punishment. They were tools of fear, used to break people physically and mentally. Whether it was the slow turning of the rack, the tightening of thumb screws, or the sudden drop of the strapado, each device had a purpose beyond pain. It was about control, submission, and making examples. Today, these devices seem barbaric and unimaginable, but they were once accepted as part of daily life. Understanding this dark chapter of history is not about glorifying cruelty. It is about remembering what happens when fear is used to justify violence, when belief is twisted into power, and when pain is mistaken for truth. The dungeons may be silent now, but the echoes of what took place there still remind us of how far we have come, and how far we must always be willing to go to protect human dignity. Thanks for joining us on this chilling journey through the shadowy corners of the medieval world. As gruesome as these torture devices were, they offer a powerful window into the mindset of a time ruled by fear, superstition, and the iron grip of authority. These weren't just instruments of pain, they were tools of control, symbols of power, and a terrifying reminder of how truth could be twisted under pressure and pain. While it's easy to look back in horror, these stories help us understand how far justice systems have evolved and why human rights matter so deeply today. The dungeons may be long abandoned and the iron rusted away, but the echoes of those dark practices still serve as a warning of what happens when compassion is lost in the name of order. If you found this video both fascinating and haunting, be sure to give it a like and share it with someone who loves exploring the stranger and darker sides of history. Don't forget to subscribe for more thought-provoking tales from the past. Till next time, stay curious, stay questioning, and always remember the lessons whispered by history's darkest corners.